I always smiled when taking my photos, but my photos stopped showing me smiling in them. Family photos were a rare and bittersweet ritual during my childhood. Once every few years, the process would unfold with painful predictability. We'd cram into our cars, itchy wool sweaters, and forced smiles in tow. The photo studio itself felt like a fluorescent-lit interrogation room where Mom would fuss over our hair, the acrid scent of hairspray hanging heavy in the air. Those portraits, stiff and awkward, captured none of the warmth or authenticity of real life. They were mere snapshots of a moment in time, devoid of any genuine emotion. School pictures were no better. Each year, I'd participate in the joyless ritual of stare, click, back to class with all the enthusiasm of a mandated flu shot. High school marked a turning point, a time when my sense of identity began to shift. Gone were the forced smiles of childhood portraits. In their place stood an angsty teenager, rebelling against the mundanity of everyday life. Then came Instagram, offering a platform that seemed to demand self-expression. Despite my initial reluctance, my friends dragged me into its orbit, and soon my profile became a meticulously curated gallery of artfully posed selfies. Head tilted at just the right angle, eyes fixed on some unseen horizon, each photo was a testament to the "I'm so cool" persona I was desperate to project. These staged snapshots, so different from the stifling family portraits of my youth, came to define my online presence throughout high school, creating a carefully crafted digital mask that concealed my true self beneath layers of filters and feigned nonchalance. My first job after high school was meant to be a temporary moneymaker, yet it ironically hurled me headlong into the heart of a bustling photo lab. The pungent scent of the developing solution permeated the air, clinging to my clothes like a stubborn shadow and seeping into my very pores. Harsh fluorescent lights bathed the room in a clinical glow, illuminating the conveyor belt of discarded memories as it trundled along. Lopsided birthday cakes captured in grainy stillness, chaotic family gatherings frozen in time, and the all-too-familiar forced grins of school portraits, each one a poignant reminder of my own awkward adolescence. In this dimly lit corner of the world, I bore witness to the fragile remnants of lives lived, loves lost, and laughter shared, all preserved in fleeting moments that seemed to dance along the edge of obscurity. The work itself was about as thrilling as watching the same movie for the 100th time. I'd punch in, submerge film canisters into their chemical baths, and battle the incessant temptation to scream my frustration into the abyss. The monotony was punctuated only by the sweet symphony of the closing bell, a beacon of relief in the desolate landscape of my workday. A few months into the job, our manager announced a new idea to offer customers personalized profile picture printouts. As she explained the details, she revealed that one of us would need to be the sample model for the promotional shots. My stomach was knotted at the thought, but before I could fully process her words, the new photo booth in the corner caught my eye. It loomed like a judgment stand, its harsh lights bleaching the life out of everything they touched. Later on that day, as I was mindlessly scrolling through my phone, my co-worker Charlene's familiar and flustered voice pierced the lab's steady drone. "Hey, you have a nice smile," Charlene chirped, a hint of desperation in her voice. "Mine being our sample profile picture model." Despite the urge to decline, I found myself nodding in reluctant agreement. The weight of expectation pressed down on me as I followed Charlene toward the photo booth, the metallic tang of developing chemicals mingling with the sterile scent of electronics in the air. I took my place before the imposing photo booth camera, its dark lens staring me down like the eye of some mechanized beast. I'd never considered myself photogenic, and the prospect of being the lab sample model filled me with anxiety. "Say cheese," Charlene exclaimed. I forced my lips to curl, the corners of my mouth trembling with the effort. The flash erupted. Temporarily blinded, I blinked away the spots clouding my vision. Charlene's eyes narrowed as she peered into the viewfinder, her brows furrowing slightly. "You need to smile if you want to be our sample profile picture model." I did smile, I mumbled defensively. She gestured toward the monitor, and I braced myself for the awkward grin I was sure I'd see. Instead, the screen revealed a face completely devoid of emotion. There was no trace of my forced smile, no hint of tension, and no spark in my eyes. "Let's try again," I offered, determined to rectify the image. I took a few steps back and fixed a smile on my face well before Charlene's finger hovered over the shutter button. The blinding flash filled my vision, and as Charlene examined the afterimage, her expression shifted to disappointment. "Now you're just messing with me." You didn't smile again. Certain I had held my smile even before the flash, I opened my mouth to explain, but she cut me off with a dismissive shrug, her focus already shifting to an awaiting customer. "Thanks anyway." Bay. I had smiled that was a certainty, yet the camera didn't capture it. My mind whirled, conjuring up possible explanations of faulty flash, a processing mistake. Eventually I pushed the incident to the recesses of my mind and completed my shift. After a few months in the photo lab, I decided to enroll in college, hoping to find a clearer path forward. College bulldozed its way into my life, a tsunami of textbooks and lectures threatening to consume me. Juggling work and studies transformed into a never-ending balancing act, but I held on to the hope that it would all lead to something better. Mornings kicked off with coffee, a futile effort to ward off exhaustion from late-night study binges. Lunch breaks became hurried pauses, a few stolen minutes to gulp down sandwiches before racing to the next lecture. Evenings turned into a chaotic dance of homework, assignments, and the inevitable dash to my part-time job at the photo lab. In the chaos, one constant remained my mother's unwavering mission to find me a romantic partner. To her, my single life was an unforgivable void, an indication I wasn't living life to the fullest. Family dinners morphed into verbal obstacle courses, filled with thinly disguised remarks and helpful articles about the joys of marriage. "Aren't you bored of frozen dinners?" she'd joke, a knowing smile playing on her lips. "Maybe someone special could make you cooked meals." I had dated a bit in high school, but no one ignited a real spark. Perhaps I was just picky, but settling for anything less than a genuine connection felt stifling. Building a life on my terms was satisfying. Loneliness seemed like a small price to pay. Finally, I moved out to my own apartment, a haven from my mother's tireless "find someone already" chorus that crescendoed whenever I was around. The tranquility was euphoric, a refreshing change from the never-ending barrage of well-meaning, or so she insisted, advice. However, as the novelty of independence wore off, an uninvited guest crept in, a loneliness that had been skulking in the background. It sneaked up on me during silent nights spent gazing at my laptop's blue glow, or while passing couples ambling hand in hand, their laughter a poignant reminder of my own solitary existence. Perhaps, hidden beneath the deluge of my mother's advice, there was a grain of truth after all. With a resigned sigh, I tensed, my jaw tightening and my fists clenching involuntarily. Perhaps it was time to surrender, to dip my toes into the turbulent sea of online dating. If nothing else, it would at least give me a story to tell Mom. I downloaded the most popular dating app. Its logo is a tasteless winking heart. The sign-up process was its own gauntlet, endless personality tests, meticulously curated prompts designed to unearth my deepest insecurities, and the constant pressure to devise a bio that was funny, deep and charming, all within a maddeningly restrictive character limit. And then came the profile picture. Perching my phone on a nearby bookshelf, I set the timer and hastily retreated a few steps, the countdown's incessant ticking slicing through the silence. The thought of capturing a decent selfie, one that wouldn't scream awkward, seemed as likely as stumbling upon a unicorn. Facing the phone, I mustered a smile, willing it to reach my eyes. The flash erupted, bleaching the room in a stark light that sapped all color. Relaxing my strained expression, I braced for the inevitable discomfort of the self-portrait. My thumb hovered over the image, and I tapped the screen. The image flickered to life. The image showed my face as plain as ever, replaced by a blank expression as devoid of life as a mannequin's. Resetting the camera, I backed away, this time keeping a smile plastered on my face as I waited for the flash. The picture snapped, and I checked my phone once more. The same unnerving blank expression stared back at me, devoid of any emotion. Desperate for this to make sense, I clung to the idea that something must have been wrong with my phone's camera. There had to be a reasonable explanation for this. I ransacked my room, digging out an old mini camera. I set the timer and positioned myself in front of the lens, forcing a smile. The camera clicked, its sharp sound echoing through my quiet apartment. As I approached the camera, my heart pounded, every step laden with anxiety. The screen confirmed my worst fears. I was a vacant shell, expressionless. But for the first time, I noticed something different. At the frame's edge, barely noticeable, was a shadow. It was vague, its shape blurry and undefined. I reset the camera and snapped another photo, making my face into an exaggerated grin. The image appeared, and my breath hitched. My face remained expressionless, but the shadow had expanded. It was no longer a faint smudge. It appeared to writhe and pulse at the edge of the frame. Panic surged through me, hot and stifling. I clumsily handled the camera, snapping yet another photo with a forced smile on my face in a frantic bid to make sense of what was happening. As I turned the screen to view the image, I nearly dropped the camera from what I was seeing. In place of the blank expression that had plagued my previous photographs, I was confronted with an image of myself standing there, my face contorted in sheer terror. The smile I had on my face when I snapped the photo had been replaced by a grotesque grimace, and the corners of my mouth stretched unnaturally wide. My eyes, wide and bloodshot, weren't focused on the lens, unlike when I'd snapped the photo, but fixated on something beyond the frame, something the camera's wide angle had inadvertently captured. The shadow. It had assumed a more substantial form, distinctly humanoid, looming at the edge of the image. The image revealed a version of me that was at odds with the moment of its capture. It seemed as if the camera had somehow stripped away the facade, unveiling the genuine emotion that was meant to be reflected on my face. Drawing a shaky breath, I switched the camera off and made my way to my couch. I slumped onto the couch, my mind grappling for explanations. No logic could explain why my captured expression didn't match the one I'd worn when taking the picture, or why there was a shadow above me in the photo. Craving nothing more than to quicken the arrival of the next day, I went to my bedroom, forcing my eyes shut in a desperate bid for rest. At around 2 a.m., something woke me from my uneasy slumber. My eyes snapped open, straining to adapt to the darkness enveloping the room. The quiet was broken only by my ragged breaths. As I scanned my room, I noticed one corner of the room that seemed darker than the rest. My gaze fixed on that specific spot, where the shadows seemed to gather more densely. It was there that I saw a darkness so profound that it defied the gentle glow of the moonlight seeping through the window. This was not the usual gathering of shadows. It was an unnaturally dense darkness, seemingly churning and pulsating with a hidden, ominous force. From within that darkness, a form started to materialize, a face that mirrored the unsettling image from the photograph. Devoid of eyes, a mouth, or any discernible expression, it flawlessly replicated the blank visage that had supplanted my own in the pictures. Abruptly, the shadow writhed, its dark tendrils extending toward me like claws. A gasp tore from my lips as I lurched up, and the bedsheet tangled around my legs. My heart thrashed against my ribcage, a frenzied rhythm breaking the suffocating silence. I was truly awake this time. Fear clawed at my throat as I searched the room. The oppressive darkness remained, but the face in the corner had vanished. I stayed up for the rest of that night, bathed in the cold sweat of fear. I'm not sure why my photos aren't showing me smiling in them, but just to be safe, I'm going to try to avoid getting my picture taken, because I'm afraid of what I might see next. My little sister isn't a missing person anymore because something else came home in her place. I know I should have been ecstatic. My mother's eyes swam with gratitude, yet mine were always cast to the ground, burning holes into crayon-ridden patches of carpet we refused to clean. We'd barely dared to dream during those silent dinners without Willow, the jarring sound of clumsy cutlery echoing through our now too empty house, conversation seeming pointless without her skipping around the dinner table, begging for the attention I gave her too little of, thumbs ghosting over my phone instead. I want to reach back in time and wrench my head from my shoulders when I think of her begging to show me a cartwheel, watching myself roll my eyes instead of grabbing her up and memorizing her face, because she would be dead soon. Days of torture turned to weeks, and Willow was gone, lost to some place only our terrible imaginations could conjure up. She was dead, but we were ghosts, haunting our own house with pale apparitions of ourselves, eating to live and speaking only to fill the silence. She was color, and the world redrew itself in black and white for the three of us. Life was over. Until it wasn't. The news she was missing had never really caught on outside the walls of our little town, so when the local policeman came to our doorstep, it was without fanfare. On the very first day she vanished. The officer leading the investigation found a small pair of gloves or gloves by the treacherous river that wound through the woods. To them, the investigation was over before it even began. There was no need to alert the press or sully the town with sad posters. The world chugged along without us, utterly unbothered, and we crumbled into thousands of pieces. But, as the rain-soaked policeman uttered on a Tuesday evening, Willow had returned, found in a patch of woods smeared with mud and blood, and asking to come back to her home. She led the police to this house, and everyone yelled in unison, "She's back." It's what my parents choked out in desperate, relieved sobs I'd never heard fill our house before. It's what all the paperwork stated, endless days of making sure everything was above board. It seemed I was the only naysayer staring into this girl's eyes and knowing with every fiber of my being that this was not my Willow sitting cross-legged on our family sofa. She looked like her, eerily so. But it was off, it was wrong. Her chin is a little too pointy, and her gaze is a little too cold. She was not my bright, bubbly little sister, dressed head to toe in pink. But she said she was. She said it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, which sparkled just a shade or two off Willow's. Her voice was a semitone lower, but that's because it's been 2 years and voices change, my mother insisted. Her chin-length hair now flowed far past her shoulders in that same chocolate hue. A length Willow would gasp at if she saw. This stranger wandered straight into our house, pulled on my sister's too small clothes, and played pretend, pulling the strings on everyone but me. The first night was something out of a horror movie, the heaviest sense of dread settling like lead in my stomach. Bile rose into my throat as she skipped into the living room, settling herself in Willow's seat and tugging impatiently at the hem of my sister's favorite dress. I'd bought it for her on a spontaneous shopping trip. Watching her eyes light up at all the little sunflowers lining the collar. She'd been giddy, and now a stranger's fingernails dug into the fabric, leaving marks I'd never get rid of. No longer would that little dress smell like Willow, because it was going to smell like her. "Come to the table," my mother insisted in a too jovial tone, her eyes more alight than I'd seen them in years. My father nodded in silent agreement, perhaps a bit more muted than she was, and I had to swallow down my fury and my confusion. I had to. 6 eyes bore into mine, and the chair scraped as I sat down. And this wasn't my sister. She stared over her plate at me with a hollow smile, her eyes devoid of any real emotion. Her fingers drummed on the mahogany, a disjointed rhythm I'd never heard despite sitting across from my sister for 9 years. "I missed you." Her words were sickly sweet, and her head tilted slightly to the side. Her gaze felt almost challenging, but my mother's eyes brimmed with tears as she nodded vigorously, her fork hanging in midair. "Oh gosh, you wouldn't believe it," she gulped her words down, overwhelmed. "You've dreamed of a family dinner, haven't you?" "Love," she regarded me almost desperately, her fingers trembling. And I had, of course. I'd cried 1,000 tears for my baby sister. But the girl swinging her legs inches from mine while sitting in my sister's clothes was not the girl I'd sobbed for. When her foot brushed mine accidentally, thousands of goosebumps erupted over my skin, because it was new and wrong. "I'd love to hear where you've been," I dared whisper into the silence. My mother gasped, her fork clattering noisily onto her plate. "Mr. Matthews said. "Yeah, and if Willow ever turns up, I'll keep quiet about it," I snapped, eyeing this wild animal before me. She sucked in a mighty breath, and I swore I felt her gaze prickle me. But it was only seconds before her eyes became doe-like wide and comical. "I don't want to talk about it," she uttered sadly, looking to my mother for reassurance. Her lip quivered, and her hands shook. It was almost laughable how overzealous her performance was, and yet my father admonished me, snapping at me to leave, while my mother gathered up the intruder in her arms, clutching at her so she'd never leave. I watched the family before me, new and being invented before my eyes. As I left, she smirked right at me. Nobody believed me. Not on the second day when I walked in and saw her doing perfect cartwheels in the living room, something Willow had been utterly hopeless at. She must have learned my mother chirped, scrubbing dishes so vigorously that I swore she was leaving cracks. Nobody blinks on the third day when she locks herself in the bathroom and claims to be too sick to head to the station to kickstart the rigorous medical testing. But it was the fourth night that haunted my dreams, driving me even closer to the edge I'd been dancing along. I'd largely managed to avoid her, other than the odd lingering gaze as we crossed paths in the hallway, or a wry smile as we brushed shoulders. Until there she was at 2 a.m., standing over me as I slept. I didn't scream. I didn't startle her into dropping her soulless smile as she gazed upon me, staring straight down mere inches from my face, so close I could feel her hot breath on my nose and feel the animosity coming off her in waves. She didn't move when I clocked her. She didn't take a step back, or pretend to be doing anything other than pressing her face into mine in the dead of night. "Why are you here?" I whispered. And we both knew I meant more than standing in my room. She laughed, a little giggle I'd never heard leave Willow's mouth. "I wanted to come home." "Silly," she hissed back, her breath tickling my cheek horribly. I swallowed, desperate not to show the fear that was beginning to course through me. "You aren't Willow," I gritted my teeth. And only then did she pull back a little, mock hurt lining her features. "That's a shame," she frowned. "You're my favorite big sister." My hands trembled under the covers. "And how many sisters have you had?" She paused then, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Oh, lots!" I don't think I've ever felt as unsafe in my life as I did in that moment, watching her eyes glimmer with something truly evil, a sick sort of pride. I didn't find my voice for a long time, but when I did, it was small and timid, a shadow of my confidence from only hours earlier. "And what do you want with us?" She thought about it for a moment, tilting her head back and forth as though the question were funny. Even in the dark, she looked wrong, as though someone had built her to look like my beloved Willow and misremembered her slightly, getting the angles and details wrong. She laid her fingers on my forehead, painfully drumming the same pattern on my skin as all those days ago. Shamefully, I was too scared to move, even as her fingers jammed into my skull. "I like your mom," she mused, giggling childishly as she caught her mistake. "Our mom, I think she's going to like me more than your sister." But before I could react, she was gone, skipping towards the door in the wrong night clothes, only turning back to casually ruin my life. "She's dead, by the way," she murmured into the silence, shrugging. "It was painful, too. Sorry for your loss." And she left, leaving me aghast as I festered in my blanket, desperately grabbing Willow's teddy bear from beside my bed and clutching it to my chest. I sobbed myself to sleep that night, my face buried in her favorite toy, knowing for sure that she was never coming home. It only got worse. One day, I came home and my father wouldn't speak, only managing to stare at his new daughter as she smirked at him from the shadow of Willow's bedroom. He startled at me in the hallway, scurrying back into his study. When I called for him, he shook his head. "Hang out with your friends, go back outside," he'd ordered, his voice cracking. He slammed the door behind him, and that was that. I was left to stare into Willow's room, locking gazes with a pair of empty eyes sneering at me from under the bed, dark shadows only giving me a glimpse at her little limbs, all cracked at the wrong angles as she twisted herself to fit where she shouldn't. When I tried to speak to my mother, she grew more and more irate, once physically covering my mouth with her hand. "Mum, please see that she isn't who she is," but she muffled my words out of existence with a trembling hand, sending me a subtle no with a quick shake of the head. She pleaded with me with her eyes, but I realized quickly that her steely gaze had fallen behind me. I didn't need to see the parasite in my peripheral to feel her gaze burning holes into the back of my head. And I wasn't imagining it, my mother was fearful, finally turning back to me with a steely resolve. "Everything is fine," she murmured, speaking 1,000 words with only her eyes and voice dropping to a whisper. "We will make it work." That night, the stranger wearing my sister's favorite bracelet gleefully pushed a piece of paper to the center of the dinner table. His eyes lit up with glee. "I drew us," she cried, greedily watching for our reactions. My mother gave nothing away, only visibly swallowing as she drank in the paper with a white-knuckled grip on her spoon. My father stood from his seat, striding from the table and slamming the front door behind him as he left us, perhaps for the last time. I, however, dared pick it up, regarding every horrific line and frantic scratching before me. It was us. Except the people labeled Mummy and Daddy were standing without heads, rivers of blood dripping down their torn torsos. My double sat in the corner of the paper, a pair of gouged-out eyes lying on the floor next to my terrified frame. Our stranger stood smiling with a large rake in her hand, her head bent to the side, and wearing my sister's dress. But somehow, worst of all, was the picture of a little girl crumpled in the corner, a frown etched upon her face, Willow the scrawl above her statement. And I could hardly bear it. I don't remember much of it now, just the screaming and crying, lifting whatever wasn't nailed down and then hurling it across the room, watching it splinter into 1,000 pieces. My mother cradled me as she dragged me upstairs, letting me bawl into her familiar sweet-smelling cardigan, clutching her as though she'd leave me too. The swirling wrongness is engulfing our house, swallowing us back into the clutches of grief. But my all-encompassing comfort disappeared because when that horrible little thing downstairs called a desperate mummy, my mother went rigid. "You don't have to go," I pleaded through bleary eyes, but her sad smile told me that she did. "I prayed for 2 years for my baby girl to come home," she'd said in a thick voice, clutching my hands as if begging me to understand. "I'll always wish I tried harder to keep her in that room with me, because the moment I loosened my grasp, I sealed her fate." The thing downstairs called, and she offered me a sad smile, fingers brushing mine, before she disappeared through the darkness of the door. I never saw her again. Before my eyes closed and sleep claimed me, I saw the head of Willow's beloved bear discarded on the floor across the room, 3 feet from its body. My heart sank into my stomach, and I drifted off into nightmares, feeling somehow that it was all over. When I awoke, slick with sweat and dread, she was there in the darkest corner of my room, almost Willow. Nighttime shrouded her, but I could see the blood, even in the dim light. Something glinted in her hand under the glow of moonlight, and her eyes blazed with something bigger than the both of us. 12 minutes passed, and she didn't move her relentless, empty stare locked onto me as she swayed back and forth. I knew that the second I moved, she was going to lunge. Somehow, I knew that's what Mom did. That's why the room fell into such uneasy silence, because I was utterly alone. And when I held my breath, I swore I could hear the shift of fabric. Yes, she was definitely closer to me than she had been 5 seconds ago. If I squinted, I could see her feet shuffling towards me in time with my erratic breathing. I ran, of course, limbs jelly, as I sprinted past my parents' room, practically choking on the stench of blood. She locked all the doors and sealed all the windows. I don't even remember how I made it to the hospital, sodden and picking glass out of my skin, as a kind nurse led me to a room, concern etched into her features as she promised to return for me as soon as she called the police. It's hard to type with blood trickling down my phone and fragments of the upstairs window jammed into my flesh. It's over, I'm sure. But somehow, with every second that passes, I feel closer to my sister, the real one. Not the one with her face pressed into the 3rd-story window of my hospital room, face contorted in bloody, evil glee. Every boyfriend I get is brutally dying. Now I know the truth about them and me. It's me, Brianna, not you. That's what my latest boyfriend told me before walking directly into the path of a truck. There was barely anything of him, just enough to peel off of the sidewalk. I thought our relationship was going well. It's not like I'm desensitized to my boyfriends dying or ceasing to exist, but it's almost become the norm. Ben was my first boyfriend in high school and my longest relationship to date. Fluffy-haired Ben with his dimpled grin and freckles. He was the type of guy who should have been popular but chose to keep to himself. I met him in the principal's office. Ben was being lectured for sneaking around, and I was handing in a late assignment. All he did was wink at me, and I fell. Hard. We dated for 2 years, and I really thought he was the one. Ben told me he loved me, and every Friday he introduced me to a new restaurant. I was in love. I loved everything about him. On the night before our senior prom, a drunk driver T-boned my boyfriend's car, killing him instantly. After his funeral, it's like he stopped existing. His parents left town, and every time I mentioned him, my parents would slowly tilt their heads and act confused when I brought him up. My brother was the worst for it, considering he and Ben were best friends. but he just looked at me with this weird fucking look in his eye, like his soul had been ripped out. Eyes are the windows to the soul, apparently. And my brother's soul was Mia. Ben, his expression crumpled. Wait. Who? Alex was my emotional support, who later became someone closer. Bunny Alex. Blonde, but not quite blonde Alex. I met him in group therapy. My boyfriend was dead, and he had just lost his mother. We didn't label it because he had a girlfriend, and I didn't want to move on so quickly. I think we just found comfort in each other. Eventually, though, Alex became something I wanted to label. His sense of humor was a breath of fresh air. I didn't go to college because of Ben's death, settling for a mediocre barista stop in town. Alex came in every day with fresh coffee and a sugar cookie. I think I loved him. I told him that. Half asleep, I told him I wanted to try and be something more with him. Alex looked taken aback but happy. We spent the night together. The morning after, I woke up to my mother screaming. Alex was dead in the bathroom, his blood splattering and staining pristine white. According to the first responders, he died of a self-inflicted head injury. The exact same thing followed. I attended his funeral, and Alex's family disappeared. This time I went back to his house. But according to a neighbor, his house had been abandoned for 10 years. I had eaten pancakes in his kitchen just days earlier. I broke in to see myself, but my neighbor was right. The hallway was piled with ancient mail and threats of eviction. Alex's room didn't exist instead. It was a storage room filled with boxes. When I got home, my family had already forgotten Alex's existence. The town had forgotten him, and yet his blood still stained my bathroom. Following Alex's death, I was terrified of getting too close to people, but Esme made it hard. She was my third relationship. We met at a bar. I was extremely drunk and convinced I was cursed to kill all of my romantic partners. Esme. Cute Esme. Crooked teeth, smudged lipstick, and warm Esme. Do you know that person you meet and instantly connect with? The person you're sure is your soulmate. That was Esme. I told myself I wouldn't get close to her. But I was already talking to this girl, already pouring my life out to her. Esme sat and listened, her chin resting on her fist. She was a first-year creative writing student, and she had a cat called Peanut. I didn't remember much after that. We hit it off, and the next thing I know, we're curled up in the back of her car, watching Buffy on her iPad. I told her about my exes, and she nodded and smiled, but I don't think she was listening. I told her all of my exes had died, and then been erased from existence. Esme called me cute. She wanted to base a story around the concept of sitting up and grabbing her phone. I have this memory of the girl I fell in love with at first sight. She's nodding along to a Smith song spluttering from my car radio, typing on her phone. I can hear the tapping of her nails and her lips curving into a smile. I can see the exact moment she gets inspiration, pulling her knees to her chest. She's wearing fishnet tights that are torn and a jacket that doesn't fit her. She is fucking beautiful, and I don't want to lose her. Alex was beautiful. He had pretty eyes and brown curls that I liked running my hands through. Ben was beautiful. He made my heart swim and my stomach swarm with butterflies when I first met him. Ben was my first love. The realization woke me up one night, 3 months into dating Esme. Both of them were dead, wiped away like they never existed, and Esme would follow. At first, I tried to break it off with her without sounding crazy. I told her it was a meme, not her, and I wasn't in the mindset for a relationship. Esme understood, but her eyes didn't. I didn't want to lose her. Esme lit up every room she entered. Her obsession with thrifted clothes and badly written poems, and her irrational fear of pandas, made her someone I wanted to be with. So, I stayed with her. I told myself Ben and Alex were just coincidences that had nothing to do with me, and I wasn't indirectly fucking killing the people I fell in love with. I avoided the L word for as long as I could. It slipped out on my way to work. Esme was driving. I just said it, and her eyes lit up. She reached out and squeezed my hand. At work, one of my colleagues, Jasper, caught my eye. When I twisted around to ask him to grab something, I glimpsed his phone screen. It looked like Tinder, though I didn't recognize the layout. It reminded me of Twitter in dark mode. Jasper was leaning against the counter, his thumb hovering over a photo of Esme, chewing his bottom lip. I watched his thumb prance across the screen before he gave up and swiped left. Finishing up the woman's coffee, I handed it over. I asked for cream. Ignoring her, I sidled in front of my colleague, hyper-focused on whatever app he was playing around with. "What's that?" Jasper looked up, his eyes widening and his lips parting, like a fucking goldfish. Clearly nothing. Jasper sidestepped me, opening the refrigerator and pulling out milk. But he already had milk. The bastard was stalling. We had 0 customers waiting, so it was the two of us in a long, dragged-out pause. Jumping up and down on the heels of his feet, he shot me his usual grin, slipping his phone into his apron. Jasper may have been smiling, though there was something twisted in his expression. I couldn't stop myself. Was that a dating app? Dating app. "Excuse me, can I get what I ordered?" the woman demanded, waving her coffee in the air. I asked for whipped cream. Jasper saw that as an excuse, an escape, and nodded, fashioning a grin. He saw an opportunity, and he took it. "Of course, ma'am. I'll get that for you," he said it with a little too much sarcasm. The boy took her coffee with a spring in his step, ducking into the refrigerator for the whipping cream. Jasper added too much whipping cream, dumping the drink on the counter with a little too much force. It was a good thing my colleague was a marginally attractive guy with cropped blonde hair and a deadpan voice that somehow attracted the ladies. Jasper could insult someone directly to their face, and they would just blush and get all tongue-tied. I had seen it happen in real time. A girl was flirting with him and used a bad pickup line, which was something along the lines of, "Did it hurt when you fell from heaven?" He laughed, and her eyes brightened. She giggled along with him, nudging her friends, but he wasn't laughing with her. I saw the gleam in his eye. He was laughing at her. Still laughing, Jasper poured her milk latte down so hard that half of it spewed out. And with that exact same charming smile, he deadpanned, "Did it hurt when you dropped out of a drainpipe?" Yeah, my colleague was blessed with good looks. Otherwise, he would have been punched in the face by now. Presently, he was being his usual asshole self. "Is there anything else I can get you?" The woman shook her head, pulling a face. Jasper had essentially ruined her drink. It was more cream than coffee. When she left the store, I situated myself in front of him when he was counting cash. "What were you just looking at?" I nodded to the guy's phone sticking out of his pocket. "Was it like a dating thing you were on?" Jasper didn't even look at me, his lip curling. "That's kind of rude," he hummed. "I don't peek at your phone." Esme Hope was all I could hiss out. Was she on that dating app? My colleague proceeded to stare at me like I'd grown a second head before his half-lidded gaze flicked behind me. Jasper's expression brightened. "Oh, Hannah's calling me," he said this, choking out a laugh. Hannah was not calling him. She was in the break room, getting high. Jasper slowly backed away, maintaining his smile. "I'll be back in a sec, all right." He grabbed that same carton of milk with a grin. "Don't you just love when your milk stays fresh?" "What?" "Fresh milk," he grinned. "Mulberry Farm's finest." Jasper was darting away before I could coerce a sentence. After work, I texted Esme as usual. She was my ride on Fridays. Esme didn't reply. I texted her again, a little more panicked. "Hey, are you okay?" When I called her, an automated voice told me she wasn't available. Already feeling sick to my stomach, I drove to her place myself. I could see the flashing lights before anything else blurred, red and blue, sending my thoughts into a whirlwind. It took me 10 minutes to muster the courage to jump out of my car and ask a pale-looking deputy what was going on. I tried to jump over the yellow tape, only to be politely pulled back. "Carbon monoxide poisoning," the deputy told me. "The whole family is dead," he sighed. "Mom, Dad, and their daughter in college. I think he was trying to be sympathetic by awkwardly patting me. But I was already on my knees, all of the breath dragged from my lungs. Luckily, it's just like going to sleep. Monoxide is a silent killer. Monoxide is a silent killer. Was that the same as... I'm sorry. Ben was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And Alex was silently suffering. He did what he thought was best. Best. I didn't go to Esme's funeral. Mom, Dad, and Will had already forgotten her, just like the others. What I did several days later, when her name wasn't even a memory anymore, was buy flowers from the store. Roses were Esme's favorite. The seller was around my mom's age. A plump-looking woman wearing a floral dress with long red hair tied into a ponytail. She was on her phone, humming to a tune on the radio. The Smiths. I hope she likes them, the woman said. She was wrapping the flowers in red ribbons. She had a strong southern accent that immediately annoyed me. I took the roses, stuffing them in my bag. What did you say? The seller cocked her head. Hey, ma'am. How did you know they were from my girlfriend? The woman sighed, placing her phone on the counter. I glanced at whatever she'd been so interested in, but the screen was facing down. Esme came in here a lot. Her lips broke out into a sad, sympathetic smile. I was quickly growing sick of them. Esme. She told me you guys were dating. Esme was always buying roses for her room. Sometimes she would stand in there for hours and just stare at flowers. I think she found comfort in them, the woman sighed, fixing me with what I could only describe as a pitiful pout. I hope you can find the same comfort, she murmured. The seller handed me an extra rose, and I found myself reaching out for it, my eyes stinging. Fuck. I hadn't cracked in at least 15 hours, and that was a record. But now I could feel myself splintering, tears trickling down my cheeks. The flower lady squeezed my hand. I'm sorry, sweetheart. If it makes you feel better, it's just like going to sleep. Monoxide is a silent killer. Her words were familiar. Exactly what the deputy said. Before I could speak, she dumped weed killer on the counter. Did you know our plant killer is $10.99? Her sudden bout of energy took me off guard. I tried to smile. I don't want any plant killers. The seller nodded, handing me another rose. Oh, of course, darling. But it is $5.99. Just for today. Something pricked me, and I hissed out, waving my hand. Damn thorns. I could already see a single spot of blood. I nodded, sucking my teeth against a cry. Thanks, but I'll skip it this time. I took the roses to what used to be Esme's grave. Now it was an empty headstone with no name, no memories, no flowers, and nothing. Just like Alex and Ben, Esme had been reduced to dirt under my feet. I stayed at her grave for a long time. Long enough for the sky to grow dark and my thoughts darker. I tried to find a logical explanation for the sudden deaths of the people I got close to, but all I could think of was a curse. So, I started Googling curses, leaning against Esme's headstone, my knees to my chest. Had I been cursed? Was my family cursed? According to Google, a cursed object is connected to the curse itself, which could be anything. Though I didn't remember visiting any ancient ruins or an old church with zero answers, I headed home. I passed a guy playing the Smiths in his car. Then there was a group of older women wearing ripped fishnets. Esme was following me. Just like Alex's smell, fresh coffee and rich chocolate. Ben's cologne filled my car last summer. His favorite band was playing all day on our local music station. I drove around with no destination, listening to each one on repeat, until I was losing him all over again. The sweet aroma of flowers followed me all the way home, and I was tipsy on the smell when I found myself face to face with a boy. Under the overexposed streetlight, this guy was almost ethereal, with thick brown hair and freckles. He reminded me of Ben, which wasn't fair. I thought I was hallucinating him before he came closer, bleeding from the shadow. I saw more of him, white strips of something wrapped around his head. Wrong. The word slammed into me when I glimpsed his clothes. Filthy. The guy was wearing a white button-down with a single streak of bright red ingrained into the material. His white pants were torn and glued to his legs. He was barefoot, the soles of his feet slapping on wet concrete. I didn't realize he was in front of me, nose to nose, until he shoved me hard. Josie, his voice was a whimper, and despite his narrowed eyes, his lips twisted into a scowl. He was crying and had been crying, every heaving sound sputtering from his mouth. The boy shoved me again, and I staggered. His ice-cold breath grazed my cheeks. "What the fuck did you do to my sister?" "Sister," I whispered. Something wet landed on my cheek suddenly. The rain. I wasn't expecting a downpour. The weather was forecast to be clear. To my surprise, the guy let out a harsh-sounding laugh. The two of us were slowly getting drenched, but neither of us was making a move to get out of the rain. My hair was glued to the back of my neck, and my clothes stuck to me. But somehow, I wanted to stay in the rain. It was refreshing. When a thought hit me, telling me to get out of the rain, it was shoved to the back of my mind. The guy spat water out of his mouth, shaking his head like a dog. Of course, he muttered, "Drown me out with the rain." I found my voice, my gaze glued to the intense red seeping through the bandage stapled to his head. He looked like he'd escaped an emergency room. "I don't know anyone called Josie," I said. "I think you've got the wrong person." The guy's eyes narrowed. He stepped closer, grabbing my shoulders, and I noticed how hollow his eyes were, empty caverns carved into his skull. Eyes are the windows to the soul, and this guy was completely soulless. "I'm only going to say this once," he whispered. "What did you do to my sister?" Before I could respond, the guy was being violently grabbed and dragged back. Figures who appeared seemingly out of nowhere. "Let me go," he cried out, struggling. "You fucking assholes. Let me go." His screaming became muffled when his cries were gagged. "You promised," he yelled, his cries collapsing into a sob. "You said if you took me, she wouldn't get hurt. So where is she?" He met my gaze, his expression crumpling, something inside him coming apart, splintering by the seams. "You can't take both of us." This wasn't in the agreement when he was dragged further back. I noticed a car parked at the side of the road. The boy was pulled inside. At first, he refused, before an extra pair of hands shoved him. "You freaking." I heard his fists slamming into the windows. "Don't take me back there. Please. Just let Josie." His cries once again collapsed into angry, muffled screaming, and I felt my hands moving towards my pocket for my phone. This was a kidnapping, right? I was witnessing a kidnapping in broad daylight. A shadow was suddenly in front of me, and I jumped, tearing my eyes from the car. Jasper, my colleague, he was still wearing his apron and, to my confusion, was swinging a carton of whole milk. "Sorry, Bree," he winked, speaking in a single breath. "As you can see, our friend here had a little too much to drink." I nodded, craning my neck. Jasper stepped in front of me, maintaining a grin. "Who is he this time?" I sidestepped away from him, only for him to copy. "Just a guy," he said. "As you can see, he's a little." Jasper prodded his right temple. "Let's just say he's got a few too many screws loose." Jasper laughed, staying still and blocking my way. When I made a move to counter him, he stepped in front of me, his eyes hardening. "I heard he lost his family a while ago," and he pretended to think. "Oh yeah, a car crash. Maybe a gas explosion, I'm not really sure." I could hear the car behind him, and once again I tried to dart past him. But he was quick to block my way. He was getting closer to me, very subtly backing me in the opposite direction. Anyway, this guy is kind of nuts. Dude still thinks he's got a sister. When I lost patience and shoved him out of the way, the car and the guy were gone. See, Jasper rolled his eyes. He was still holding milk from work. My head spun. It was 8 p.m. We were in a suburban neighborhood, and Jasper was holding half a pint of milk. His apron was stained with coffee, and when I really looked at him, I realized he was out of breath. He was doing a good job of hiding it, exhaling in intervals, and swiping at his forehead to clear sweat. When I noticed, he pretended to run his hands through his hair. I feel for him. I'm sorry his family died or whatever, but attacking random girls isn't cool, you know. Instead of replying, I stumbled home. It was sunny, at 8 p.m., And when I took notice, I wasn't even wet. Esme was the last straw. I made a promise to myself to not get close to anyone. The guys and girls I met were friends and nothing more. Weirdly enough, the only guy I was getting close to was my colleague. I don't know if it was brain damage, or if I was finally losing the plot. But Jasper's shameless cruelty towards customers, and that quirk in his lips when he made them cry was kind of hot. However, he was playing hard to get. And I mean really playing. I was in stores trying to find vegan milk, and he was suddenly a fucking expert, spewing milk facts. When I slammed the refrigerator door shut, he was inches from my face. In the dim light from a single spluttering bulb, his eyes reminded me of coffee grounds. I thought maybe he was going to kiss me, judging from his softening expression. I felt his hands go around my waist, and I felt myself immediately melt. I don't know what came over me. It's like 1 minute I hated him, and the next, I was suddenly hot. Really hot. And I really wanted to take my clothes off. I thought that's what he wanted to do too. I mean, his gaze followed mine, piercing. His fingers playing with the buttons on his shirt. Before he leaned forward, his breath was in my face. Did you know that Mulberry Farms is an award-winning brand of milk in our town, and only in our town? Mulberry Farm was bred and made right here. And suddenly, I was no longer hot and bothered. I said, ducking into a crouch to search the shelves. Have you seen our vegan milk? We did have some. 3-time winners, Jasper continued. When I jumped up, he stepped closer, and I felt my cheeks spark. His smile was rare. In fact, Jasper was only smiling when he was talking about milk. Mulberry Farms has the best pasteurization. It's suitable for everything. Coffee, cereal, or maybe you just want a glass of fresh milk for yourself. Perfect for kids, too. Breakfast time is Mulberry Farms. Are you having a stroke? I whisper shrieked. Nope. Jasper twisted around, shooting me a grin. I left the storage, however, with butterflies in my gut. There was no way I was falling for my asshole colleague. Somehow, though, I was. Just standing next to him filled me with electricity. The way he talked down to customers, insulting me to my face, made me feel thoroughly and disgustingly in love. I tried to stop myself. I showered in ice-cold water. I ate choked on a ghost pepper. I even asked my brother-in-law for advice, and he told me to go for it. I told him Jasper had one of several flaws, but this particular one was off-putting. He's obsessed with milk, I told my brother. Harry lifted a brow. Is that a euphemism, or... He paused for way longer than necessary. So, your would-be boyfriend has a milk fetish? I left his room before he could take that conversation further. I wanted to say Jasper was the only one who acted weird. But over the next few weeks, I noticed it in quite a few people. I was having breakfast with Mom, and she lifted up the box. Choco flakes, she blurted. Aren't they just the best? I nodded slowly. Yeah, Mom, they're great. I prodded the box with a smile. Only $1.99. There were so many townspeople on their phones. They walked around with groceries or briefcases, their eyes glued to whatever they were swiping through. I was serving an old woman when I caught her phone screen. I could have sworn there was an image of Jasper. She swiped right, and I had a hard time looking her in the eye. The woman was at least in her 80s. And I'm talking, I can barely walk and need assistance. Oh, was she seriously hitting up 25-year-old guys? As I walked home, everyone was on their phones. I stopped at a crossing, stabbing the red light. It started to snow the second I stepped out onto the road, white flakes dancing in front of me. It didn't even cross my mind that it was almost June. The snow was pretty, accumulating on the ground. Oh, sorry. Lifting my head, a guy was standing in front of me, holding an umbrella. I knew him. But not from whatever was trying to pollute my mind. I knew him a while ago. I knew him from the rain. I knew the bloody bandages wrapped around his head and his soulless, seething eyes which I couldn't understand. It was the boy who was dragged away 3 months prior. He looked different. His hair was shorter and shorter and shorter, and his face was carved into a thing of beauty. The white strips of gauze bleeding scarlet were gone, his filthy clothes replaced with a white shirt and pants, and a trench coat flung over the top. I didn't remember him being this handsome. His dark brown hair had been tamed and curled. It was his expression that sent shivers sliding down my spine. His too wide smile and unblinking eyes made me suddenly conscious of two bright lights between the two of us. So bright. Something shattered in my mind, and I was aware of a lot of things. The snow under my feet was too soft. I glimpsed a single streak of red seeping from his nose, his hands trembling around a takeout coffee cup. Behind me, people were staring. I could see a group of teenage girls giggling. "It's him," one of them squeaked. "It's the new love interest." His grin widened, snowflakes prancing around us. His teeth grated together. I could tell he hated every word. "Holy shat, long time no see." He held out his hand, and I could see visible pain contorting in his eyes. "Help me," he was screaming with a twinkling smile. "Don't you remember me? It's Sam," he laughed. "From 8th grade." The lights blinked out, and the thought crashed into my mind. Static images filled my head. I shook them away. Oh yeah, it was Sam, my childhood friend. But I didn't reply. Instead of saying, "Sam," it's been so long, I found myself walking and stumbling over to the girls, who were rapidly swiping left on their phones. "What's that?" I demanded with a sharp breath. I grabbed the phone, only for Sam to step in front of me. He settled me with a smile. Behind me, one of the girls fainted. Sam's smile didn't waver. Though he did side-eye the girl being carried away, he said, "Why don't I take you out for coffee?" Apparently, coffee was the code word for hooking up. Sam dragged me into the nearest coffee store, straight to the bathroom. When he shoved me into a stall, I didn't know what to say. "Take off your shoes," he said in a hiss, and after hesitating, I did. Sam pulled off his jacket, shook snow out of his hair, and got real close. "Look up," he murmured. I did, my gaze finding the ceiling. To your right, a camera is very well hidden, but can be seen with the naked eye if you catch what looks like a red laser, Sam said. To your left is another camera, as well as a vent that is currently pumping the stalls with aphrodisiacs, and right now we are in the red zone. You should be conscious. He prodded me, and I flinched, mostly conscious. His words went right over my head. My mind was foggy. I couldn't think straight. I think I asked him what he was saying, but my mouth was filled with cotton. "Snap out of it," he said. "Like I said, they're making you feel like this." He shoved me against the door, which broke me out of my trance, slightly. "I hate what I'm going to say right now," Sam groaned, tipping his head back. He was sweating, I noticed. Bad. I glimpsed beads of red pooling down his neck. He noticed me staring. "I'm okay for now. I'm faulty, so the connection is severed." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I think." "What are you talking about?" "Sex," he said this, blinking rapidly. I wasn't going to comment on his slurring voice. Sam stumbled, fresh blood dripping from his nose. "We need to do the sex." Like his eyes rolled into the back of his head, but he managed to stabilize himself. "Now, what? Is everything okay in there?" The voice was that of a woman. She knocked on the door. Sam's eyes widened, coming back to life a little. "They're paranoid," he whispered. When I could only stare at him, he pounded his fists into the door. "They think we're fucking," he hissed. "So we need to make it believable." I mouthed. He didn't reply, swiping at his hemorrhaging nose. "Just move around against the door. That'll fool him." I did, doing my best to shuffle around, slamming my back against the lock. When the metal clanged, he shot me a look. "Sex," he hissed, "not murder." Sam jumped onto the toilet bowl. There was an open window above him. That's enough. Enough, he mouthed, hoisting his way through. He helped me through, and I expected to land on concrete. What I did land on, however, was something squishy. Something wet is sliding between my bare toes. Looking closer, I recognized the beaded anklet. Fishnet tights. Something animalistic clawed at my throat. I was standing on Esme, or what was left of Esme. She was just a torso and legs. The rest of her body was ripped away like doll pieces. I couldn't see her face. I looked for it, digging through what could only be old flesh and pieces of limbs. I felt suffocated. I grabbed half of Ben's face that had been ripped off, and then Alex's tattooed arm. There were so many of them, piles and piles of the same heads, the same filthy and rotting clothes. I was screaming by the time I shuffled back on my hands and knees, trying to wipe them off of my skin. They were all over me, staining and painting me. Sam's hand, slick with blood, gently covered my mouth. "Stay calm." "All right," he whispered. "I would tell you everything is going to be okay, but the truth is, it's really not. There's like a 99.9% chance you're going to, understandably, freak out." He pulled me to my feet, letting out a heavy breath. Blinking rapidly, I could only see pieces of people. Legs, heads, and torsos were all piled into one mass of gore. "We've got maybe 5 minutes before they realize we're not doing the devil's dance," Sam sniffled. "Maybe 10, before my brain short circuits and I bleed out." I didn't know I was hyperventilating until I couldn't fucking breathe. Closer to the door, and I could hear machinery. I couldn't stop myself. Even when I was aware, I was standing in congealing blood, rotten bodies. The dim light led me into what could only be described as a factory. There were 3 levels, and we were on the highest. Sam stepped forward, gripping the metal bar in front of us. I felt my legs buckling, a thick, pukey slime filling my mouth. So, I guess it all started when Brianna Timberman was 17 years old and rejected by her childhood best friend, Sam Thwaites. Sam's words collapsed into a low buzz in my ear. All I could see was a conveyor belt filled with people. Boys. Girls. But most noticeably, Ben's, Alex's, Esme's, and Sam's. But they start as Ben's, Alex's, and Esme's. I could see regular people with their hair stripped away. Their skin was sliced, cruelly molding them into the exact same 4 faces. When a large, looming needle plunged into the back of Alex's head, I could not watch. I waited for the guy to wake up, but I didn't even think he was alive. He stood, unblinking, letting this thing twist and contort his face. And it was then that I realized these things weren't even humans. Humans. I could see the mechanics built under their flesh, both living tissue and metal melded together. Brianna's father, who is a little on the crazy side, with too much cash and not enough logic, took his daughter's rejection a little too personally, Sam continued. So, he promised his daughter he would find her the perfect match. I started to speak, the words coming out before I could stop them. My father would never. "I didn't say it was your father," Sam said. His eyes darkened. "Anyway, as I was saying, the townspeople became unhealthily obsessed with who Brianna would choose. So obsessed, in fact, that the girl's day-to-day life was broadcast across town, while her potential love interests were ranked week after week. First there was Ben. Sam's smile thinned. Her high school boyfriend. Sam shrugged. She grew bored of him. Also, he kind of did something unforgivable. He continued. Then, Alex. She liked him, but sometimes he was a little too unserious. The guy was a clown. I backed away, but he was quick to grab my shoulders. Finally, Esme. Who she truly fell for. I swallowed. Esme is. He cut me off. But I didn't mention that they hurt her, did I? Sam leaned against the bar. Behind him, I could see a figure in white pushing a gurney with a Ben strapped to it. Ben tried to rape her, insisting she wanted it. Alex dumped her on her birthday. Esme ended their relationship with a one-word text. Goodbye. Sam mimed an explosion. That was the nail in the coffin. I caught blood sliding down his nose. You're still bleeding. Sam gingerly prodded his nose. Urgh. Yeah, it's an effect of the severing. I've been in the red zone for too long. I should probably speed this up. He talked faster, his voice collapsing into a mumbled slur. Brianna couldn't take it. Her best friend was ignoring her. Everyone she had fallen in love with hurt her. Esme wasn't returning her calls. Ben was sleeping around right in front of her, and Alex was still being a clown. Brianna's poor parents found her hanging from her bedroom ceiling fan. I shook my head, my thoughts screaming. No. He held a finger up to shush me. Let me talk. Jeez. Sam folded his arms. A grieving father would do anything to avenge his dead child, but Mr. Timberman took finding a perfect match in the show must go on a little bit too literally. His sickly smile found me, which also means going stark fucking crazy. The town wanted more of Brianna and her life, so he turned his daughter's failed love life into a town-wide TV show, sending the entire teen and young adult populace into here. He gestured around him to make the perfect suitors. Who wouldn't hurt his new Brianna? Something ice-cold crept down my spine. He cleared his throat. Mr. Timberman grew, let's say, obsessed with getting revenge on these specific 4 people. So he started killing them. He coughed. Sorry. Us. Killing us for the funny haha. Look at how many times I can fuck with them bit. And then recycling us into someone completely different. Our names are gone. Then our personalities. Finally, our bodies were ripped to pieces and sculpted into Brianna's exes. Sam poked me in the cheek. The cycle continues. They reset your ticker, and the town eats it up. They can bring back Esme, Ben, and Alex whenever they want and add curveballs. Like the bad boy colleague who becomes the fan favorite. Sam's lips curled. For some fucking reason. His eyes flickered open. However, Brianna will never find a suitor because her father is a fucking sociopath. To him and the town, his dead daughter's pathetic love life is entertainment. He held out his arm. See. I tried really hard not to look through the makeup. Noticeable skin grafts. I was a Ben, he said. Then I was an Alex. And then I was an extra. His eyes found mine sad suddenly. But who I was originally is kind of gone. All I remember is a deal to protect Josie. I gave myself up so they wouldn't take her. Your sister, I said. Sam nodded. His earlier words hit me. He was talking like Brianna Timberman was dead. But I was Brianna Timberman. I was rejected by Sam. Yes, but I found Ben. As if he could read my mind, Sam shook his head. Look at yourself, he said it. His voice shaking. And I mean, really, look at yourself. Sam stepped closer. Because underneath all of that makeup, prosthetic surgery, and fucked up memories, you're just another recycled lump of flesh. He prodded my temple. Who thinks she is Brianna Timberman? His voice was slurring again, a fresh stream of scarlet seeping down his chin. Don't you want to know? His eyes rolled to pearly whites. Before he could finish his sentence, Sam dropped to the ground. I remember warm arms grasping at me, shadows with no faces. They pricked me twice in the back of my neck, a familiar voice in my ear, almost a hiss. Jasper. You are the worst fucking Brianna. When I came to, I was standing up somehow, at work. I am Brianna Timberman. The thought floated around in my head, my memory hazy. Hello. A man was waving his hands in front of me. I asked for iced coffee, lady. Jasper was serving another customer. Bree, wake the fuck up. They were trying to make me think I was hallucinating, which was crazy, because my fingernails were still tinted with Sam's blood. The marks he'd left on my wrist when he was yanking me were still there. I bruised my arm. Bree, Jasper snapped. Snap out of it, and make the dude his drink. Right. The words slipped out of my mouth. He caught my eye, winking, and Brianna Timberman internally squeaked. I half wondered what he was. Was he recycled or an unwilling performer? Throughout the day, I was fully aware my words were not mine, like I was on autopilot. But not just that. My thoughts weren't mine either. I spent half of my shift staring at my colleagues' biceps. During my break, I went into the bathroom and stood in front of the mirror. I am Brianna Timberman. But even when I told myself that, my eyes were too blue. My smile was too perfect. My teeth, too white. My shaking hands prodded at my face and at someone else's face. So many faces and so many skin grafts. The thought was violent, sending tremors through me. How many people was I wearing? I started to claw at my arms, legs, and face. How many fucking people had I been? I grabbed a knife and tried to slice my face, but there was no blood. How could there be no blood? When I got home, I found my family waiting for me. Mom, Dad, and Harry, all of them beaming. Bree Mom stood up, her lips stretching into a grin. My mouth was already moving, but they were not my words. Mom. I didn't know why she was smiling so much until I saw Sam sitting at our dining room table. His smile was too big. His overly expensive shirt and pants did not suit him and looked fucking gross. But somehow my brain thought it was hot. The worst part is, I couldn't and still can't tell which Sam he was. Was he the guy who told me the horrific reality of my existence? Or was he another recycled, mindless suitor? This is Samuel, Mom said. And Sam slowly stood. He took slow steps towards me and kissed my hand. I saw the slightest smudge of scarlet on his lip, but his eyes were blank. In the corner of my eye, my father's eyes were glittering. Hello, Brianna, Sam said, and I swore now that I was awake, the walls were wolf whistling. Laughing. My town is a blip on the map. We're so small and insignificant that not even a Google search will find us. I keep thinking that if I tear at my skin, I will find who I am underneath. But I'm so fucking scared. I don't bleed. I don't think who I was still exists under so many layers. But even if this is just a cry into the void, please help us. I don't want to be Brianna Timberman.